The first uncomfortable truth is around understanding how your investment portfolio or asset allocation works. The reality is that if your guaranteed income, such as final salary pensions or state pensions, is less than your expenses, and assuming you opt for drawdown when it comes to taking an income from your pension, then you're likely going to need to invest your retirement savings to help the sustainability of the fund in future years. In my experience, many clients just don't have an appreciation or understanding of how investments work and what the expected returns and drawdowns could be. Drawdowns being how much the portfolio could go down in a bear market or times of stress, such as during the banking crisis in 2008 or more recently during COVID in March 2020. If your portfolio or asset allocation has gone down by 20, 30 or even 40% or more in the past, although past performance isn't a guide to the future, it is reasonable to expect that your portfolio could see similar losses in the future, if not even more than this. What I find is that many retirees just don't appreciate their investments could see this volatility, and so when their portfolio inevitably drops in value, they panic and throw in the towel. That's all well and good, Alex, but how do I know how much my portfolio could go up or down by, and how long will it take my portfolio to potentially recover? Well, one way to do this is to use a website called Portfolio Visualizer. Now, word of warning, this is geared to US investors and based on US investments, but it is still quite useful. It's based on the US because that has really got the oldest data. To show how this works, we're going to demonstrate what a typical 50% stock and 50% bond portfolio would have done in the past. We're not advocating this asset allocation, it is just to simply give you an idea how a combination of these two asset classes has done in the past. So we're in Portfolio Visualizer. Data goes back from 1987 to today, so nearly let's call it 40 years, give or take. We can see the returns from on here. So this kind of asset allocation has done very well. It's gone up by nearly just over 8% a year, and we can see that in the growth of $10,000. $10,000 from 87, it would have grown to just under £189,000. But what we want to focus on is the risks and drawdown. Okay, so looking at the drawdowns of how this asset allocation would have done, we could see there's been some significant drops here. These are some of the biggest over this time frame. Most recent one was 2022. If you think back, that was the onset of the war in Ukraine. Inflation surged, interest rates rose dramatically, which had a knock-on effect on both bonds and stocks. Both of them got clobbered, and you can see a fall nearly of 20%. The most dramatic here is the banking crisis, where everyone thought the financial system was going to melt, and then we've got others here, such as the dot-com crash. So the point that we'd like to highlight is that if a drop in your portfolio, 10%, 20%, 30%, if either of those just sounds totally unpalatable, would cause you to panic, then if that is the case, then your risk tolerance is at odds with your investment strategy, and it may be prudent to review things. Back to what I think is one of the biggest risks, and that's the sequence of returns risk. You retire in 2008, you begin to start taking an income. This is really bad for you because not only are you now taking an income, but you're taking an income from a lower portfolio value. So what can you do to mitigate this? Well, one, if we look at the underwater period here, which is basically how long it takes for your portfolio to recover from when it started to fall. So you can see here, and the worst one in this time frame was 3 years, some around 2 years, a couple much shorter. But what you can do to mitigate that sequence of returns risk is keep some cash back to cover maybe a year or 2 years worth of expenses. So in other words, the proverbial hits the fan. Instead of taking it from your falling portfolio, you can take it from your cash reserves and give your portfolio time to recover. Final point that shows and really highlights the power of diversification, having your assets spread in different asset classes, is the rolling returns of this asset allocation. So we can see during this time frame, if you hold this portfolio for say more than 5 years here, even if you're the most unluckiest of investors, you'd have almost have generated a positive return. I think it was down by 0.5%. We'll cut that flat. And it just shows you that the longer you hold this portfolio, even if you're the most unluckiest of investors, you'd have still made money. Most unluckiest of investors, just a small gain of 1.55 on average. Yeah, back to that figure closer to the that mean return that we saw of 8%. Another issue I see is that because of this volatility, more conservative retirees with their pensions or indeed savings in general will just hoard their cash and leave it in the bank or under the proverbial mattress. While saving rates are very attractive at the minute, this has not always been the case, and indeed the return on cash-based investments historically has been lower than that of inflation for the most part, meaning that rather than being the safe haven that you think cash is, you're actually losing money in real terms after inflation. So what are the implications of this? Let's take John. He's 63, he's got a pension worth 200k, and he's planning on taking 10k a year, which equates to a starting withdrawal rate of 5%. The income that he takes, that 10k, will assume it increases by 2.5% a year to keep up with inflation. Let's assume he's a really nervous investor and he leaves his whole pension in a cash-based product, and we'll assume the returns are 2.5% a year. So, under these scenarios, the pension pot would run out at age 84. How about if John had instead invested the funds in a balanced portfolio of various asset classes, which we'll assume grows by 5% a year? How will that affect the sustainability of the pension fund? Well, if that was the case, it grew at 5%, then the pension fund would support John for a further 7 years, running out at 1991. If he was to pass away at age 80, the pension fund would still be worth over 132k, whereas in the previous example, the pension would only be worth £42,000 at that point. This means the opportunity cost of taking no investment risk or very little investment risks means that the sustainability and longevity of the pension fund will be lower, and what's more, this also could mean your loved ones perhaps inherit less, as pensions in most cases can be passed to your nominated beneficiary free of inheritance tax. The second uncomfortable truth I find is that retiree spending drops significantly as they move into what I like to call later retirement, and they don't do things that they used to do, such as holidays. Going hand in hand with this, I'll also see clients who are recently retired often struggle with transitioning from the accumulation phase, i.e. whilst they're working and saving their money, transition into the decumulation stage of their life. Retirement and now taking an income from their pensions and investments. As they develop good savings habits, maybe they're now naturally frugal, or spending their retirement savings just doesn't seem right, or fills them with worry that they may run out of money further down the line. Actually spending their hard-earned money can be really difficult. With either a drop in expenditure later in retirement or just a reluctance to spend your hard-earned money, this means we'll often see clients, when they pass away, leave behind rather large estates and big pension funds. This isn't really a problem if your primary objective is to leave behind a large inheritance for your children or loved ones after you've gone, but it is an issue if actually your primary objective was to use your pension fund to enjoy your retirement as much as possible, or do those things that you always dreamed of, such as the trips around the world, etc., or gifts to your family when they actually need the money when they're younger for house deposits or weddings, etc. We often hear from clients as they plan for retirement and thinking what they want to do with their retirement, say that they wish to spend all of their retirement savings whilst they're alive, and the children can inherit the equity from their matrimonial home, as just one example. So what can you do to address this if you fall into either of these camps? Well, one option is to use a withdrawal strategy as a guide. The first approach I'd always recommend would be to carry out a cash flow, where you can model different scenarios, such as different ages for life expectancy, factor in care fees and different spending limits to see if the income that you take is going to be sustainable, and this can hopefully give you a bit of peace of mind that you won't run out of money. If carrying out a cash flow isn't an option, then one thing that you can do is use the likes of the 4% rule as a guide. In research published in 2018 and based on the architect of the 4%'s work, Bill Bengham, they found that from 1925 to 1990, the lowest safe withdrawal rate during this period was actually 4% a year. And in some years, when returns were particularly favourable, the safe withdrawal rate increased to almost 10%, as you can see on the screen now. Of course, knowing what future returns will be is impossible to predict, so one option to use a withdrawal rate is to say that if your income falls below this 4% target, then your withdrawal strategy is relatively conservative, whereas if the income you take is above 4%, you're being a bit more aggressive, but perhaps not unreasonably so. Another consideration is to look at a variable withdrawal strategy, such as the guardrails approach, which, unlike the 4% rule, which is a static amount of income each year, with the guardrails approach, if your portfolio either increases or reduces by 20% in value, then you increase or reduce the starting withdrawal rate by 10%. I've done a video on this little known strategy, but the founder of this, a chap called Guyton, his thesis was that the 4% rule was in fact far too conservative and prevented retirees from benefiting from investment growth and then actually taking more income from their portfolio, which is again the theme of this point, not living your retirement to the full. And on the other side of the coin, if it forces you to reduce your spending needs when your portfolio falls in value significantly, this helps with the sustainability and protect against the sequence of returns risk, which I think is one of the biggest risks to retirement, the idea that the timing of investment returns matter. One issue we find with those at or approaching retirement is that they haven't really considered how much they're going to need to spend in retirement and are retiring on a hope and a prayer or just relying on the state pension. For most people, the state pension at around £11,500 in today's money for the full amount is just not going to be enough for a half decent retirement. With the state pension age currently 66 and rising to 67, in my experience, many people I talk to of varying means, they wish to retire much earlier than this. Whilst there's nothing wrong with this and retiring early, and it's in fact a noble pursuit, retiring earlier before the state pension naturally demands having a larger nest egg, particularly if you plan to bridge more income from your savings or private pension before the state pension kicks in later on. Now, if you don't want to pay someone like me to run a cash flow account, or you don't want to do it yourself on Excel with a DIY version, how can you come up with a more simplistic approach to really working out how much you're going to need to spend in retirement, how much fund value you'll need to address that spending needs? Estimate or budget what you think you're going to spend in retirement. This could involve increasing or removing the expenses that you're no longer going to have to pay. I'd always suggest sitting down and coming up with an individual and bespoke budget, as you may like to vacation in Saint-Tropez, while for others they're content with a camping holiday in North Wales. So you've arrived at the figure of how much you think you're going to need to spend in retirement. Step 2 is to deduct any forms of income you may have in retirement, such as state pensions, rental income, final salary pensions, etc., etc. The third step, after you deducted this other source of income from the amount of income you need, is to calculate what fund or pension value is going to be needed to address that shortfall. One rough and ready way to do this is to use the concept of a safe withdrawal rate, like the 4% rule. It's not to say 4% is the best withdrawal rate, nor does it guarantee that you won't run out of money. It's just a very blunt tool that will get you thinking about if your retirement savings are sufficient enough to retire. Let's see an example of how this works. So Brad and Angelina, who I've used before, they're 66 and are about to retire. They require a combined retirement income of 35k. Aside from their private pensions, they've got no other retirement income except for the full state pensions, which combined, let's call it £23,000 a year for the both of them. This means there's a shortfall of 12k a year that they're going to have to meet from their private pensions. So what we do is we take £12,000, divide this by 4%, and this means Brad and Angelina should be aiming for a combined retirement fund of 300k. Now, if you feel comfortable taking a higher withdrawal rate, such as 5 or even 6%, then this means you'll need a lower fund value, although this will increase the chance that you'll run out of money as it places a greater strain on your retirement fund and investment returns being more amenable. This rough and ready calculation works well if you plan on retiring at your state pension age or if your retirement income starts simultaneously all at once, but it works less well if you plan on retiring earlier if you have various income streams starting at different times. So far, we've focused on the importance of the numbers in the build-up to retirement, and clients always focus on the financial aspects. Is there enough money? How can I take a tax-efficient income, and ensuring that the investment portfolio is correct based on the risk appetite and capacity for loss, etc. But the fourth uncomfortable truth when it comes to retirement, which is a little bit corny, especially from a 30-something who still has no facial hair, is that the financial side of things shouldn't be the sole priority when planning for your retirement. Of equal importance is thinking about, in the build-up to retirement, before you pull the trigger, what will you do with your newfound freedom and time? Too often we see successful individuals, when they retire, lose their sense of purpose and identity and can enter an almost depression-like state when they retire. So what I would urge you to do is focus on what you want to do with your retirement and coming up with a routine and schedule to prevent you from watching Jeremy Kyle in the day. Be it hitting the golf course, hiking, volunteering, looking after the grandchildren, or time to see those countries that have been on your bucket list. If drawdown confuses you and you want to know how pension is taxed, how drawdown pensions are taxed, and how to make your withdrawals as tax efficient as possible, watch this video on the screen now.